I have to use notes these days because I'm not allowed any jokes or throwing any red books about. Okay. Look, I think you've seen today that nothing could be starker than the contrast between the debate on the referendum with regard to the progressives on the left and the debate on the right. I think the debate on the right is disfiguring discourse, political discourse in this country. People are becoming increasingly tired of the ranting hysteria that we've seen from the right. To be frank, it's turning people off. The Tories seem to be transposing the gang warfare of the Eton playground and the battles over the Tory leadership succession onto our national political scene. It's rancorous, personal and bitter, and to be honest, it's degenerated into name-calling and hyperbole of Project Fear, with ludicrously exaggerated claims and counterclaims from both sides of the Conservative Party. Johnson's comparisons of the EU with the Third Reich and Cameron's claims of impending World War III, they just beg a belief, to be honest. The economic argument has degenerated into, one hand, a description of the economic paradise post-Brexit and outside the single market, and on the other hand, the near Pompeii-like condition of the City of London across the economy if we leave the EU. To be frank, I think what you've all said today is that we just cannot go on like this. We cannot let the Conservatives and the rest of the right drag this debate into the intellectual gutter. Our country and our people deserve better than this. We must not allow the decision over the future role of Britain in Europe to become embroiled any further in the infighting over who's to be the next leader of the Tory party, or the exploitation, to be frank as well, of people's insecurities by the far right as well. So it's time now for those on the left and on the progressive spectrum to step in, and it's our job now to retrieve this debate and save it from the right. The nature of the debate on the left should be in dramatic contrast to that on the right, and I think it already is, to be frank. It has to be collegiate and, in Labour Party terms, comradely. A discussion amongst friends and allies who seek the same goal but offer a different route and a mechanism to achieve that goal. So let's appreciate that there are those on the left who have a principled, rational and coherent argument why we should vote to leave. But we just believe they're wrong. Let's look at where we agree. First, on the left and on the progressive spectrum, we all accept that many of the immensely critical issues we face are transnational and they require transnational political solutions. Second, our consciences don't end at the Channel or at the North Sea. I want to look at some of the examples that you've been discussing today of the transnational challenges we face. On energy, in creating our energy to light and warm our homes and power our industries, to be frank, I don't want to poison the air breathed by families in Paris, Madrid or Athens, or put their very future existence or their descendants' existence at risk of cataclysmic consequences of climate change. You've discussed today the immense and imminent challenge of climate change that warrants an urgent transnational response from transnational political institutions. We know the EU is and could be an even more critical part of that much-needed transnational architecture to respond to climate change. That's one of the reasons why we want to remain in. On resources, to rise to the challenge of poverty and inequality, both in Britain and across Europe, we need to harvest the resources of this rich continent effectively and fairly and wisely. How in all conscience can we turn a blind eye anymore to the City of London effectively operating like a funnel to offshore tax havens for the taxes of transnational corporations and super rich? The taxes that should be paid to fund healthcare for the sick, the care for the elderly, the education of our young and tackling poverty, public funding that's desperately needed, not just in this country, but right the way across Europe. We know that if we clamp down here, the tax evaders and avoiders will move elsewhere. That's why European agreements are necessary, and which form the basis of global agreements to track down and confront tax evasion and avoidance. That's why we need to stay in. Also, we shouldn't be able to sleep at night when we see refugee children's bodies washed up on the beaches of the Mediterranean. Memories are often sadly short. Europe learnt the harsh truth after the Second World War of the consequences of the barbarity of war and conflict. It faced then a refugee crisis on a scale never witnessed before. But by coordinated transnational cooperation across Europe, refugees in their millions were supported and resettled. It took time and concerted action across the whole of Europe. Vital lessons were learned about how to prevent, resolve and respond to conflicts. Setting up the European-wide institutions to bring people together was one of those lessons. If European unions were eventually established for anything, to be frank, it was to ensure that we could come together effectively to rise to those humanitarian challenges on our shores. We should do nothing that puts at risk the institutions that enable us to take this coordinated response to be organised to tackle the refugee crisis. That's another reason for staying in. And it's important that on the left, we don't avoid the issue of free movement and immigration, which is inevitably coming to fore in this debate. None of us underestimate people's anxieties and emotions on this issue. We know that if we ignore it, we do so at our peril. So it has to be confronted head on. So point by point, let me make these. The British have been, and almost certainly will continue to be, one of the greatest beneficiaries of the free movement of people across Europe. Whether it's the Brits retiring to the warmth of the sun, or the quiet countryside of rural France, or the beaches of Greece, or our young people increasingly opting to study and work across Europe, or British workers taking work elsewhere when our own economy has slowed, it's the British that are reaping the rewards of travel and settlement that free movement brings us. Inward migration often keeps our own economy afloat, filling the skills gaps and supporting an ageing population pay its way. I speak as the grandson of an Irish immigrant, and I have to tell you, it's been the case for almost a century and a half that migrants have supported this economy and kept it afloat. I'm proud that it was often Irish men. I'm proud that it was often Irish men who built most of the infrastructure on which you travelled to get here today, many of the buildings we work in and hold these meetings in, and it was Irish women nurses who populated the NHS, cared for the elderly, taught in our schools and worked in the factories that rebuilt the economy after the Second World War and beyond. I'm proud of being the grandson of a migrant worker. But we have to be straight with people as well. Of course, migration on any scale presents its problems of integration and pressure on public services. But all of these problems can be readily overcome. The vast bulk of the evidence demonstrates that migrants pay more into the economy than they take out. And despite general concerns about migration, all the evidence shows that on a one-to-one basis and within communities, the nature of British people is to be extremely welcoming to incomers. People generally just want to get on with each other and live in peace and harmony. And we mustn't let the Tories use immigration as the smokescreen for the cuts in public expenditure that they've introduced as austerity. Our public services, the NHS in particular, and our house building and infrastructure programmes would be in real difficulties but for the staff coming from across Europe. Where there are pressures in a particular area, the simple and obvious solution is specific programmes of government support to deal with them. To be frank, it's not rocket science. So finally, we have a duty also to address the issue of migration in a way that's positive, in which we as a community can respond to receive the benefits of migration, at the same time overcome some of the short-term issues. The question for the left then is whether we can transform the operation of the European Union. It's the same question asked by the left about any state institutions, whether it's the local council, the national government, or any transnational institutions. The strategy we pursued on the left in the past and now has been described traditionally as in and against the state. The state isn't just a set of institutions, it's a relationship, usually one of dominance of the institution over the individual. Socialists and progressives have gone within these institutions to transform that relationship. That is to transform it into a democratic relationship where it is the democratic people's wishes that dominate, not the bureaucracy or the powerful economic interests that the bureaucracy often represents. So finally, that's the challenge question posed to the modern left. Can we and how can we democratically transform our European institutions? But the optimism is based upon this. For the first time in over a generation, there are movements and political forces mobilised and mobilising across Europe to respond to that challenge, but responding to it increasingly together. We have the opportunity now from today's debate to reroute the referendum debate away from Tory Brexit and into a debate about the democratic future of Europe, about another Europe. About another Europe, a Europe that's not just possible, but urgently and vitally needed, where we can say, yes, we're proud of being British, but we're also proud of the European future that we're creating in solidarity. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, John. That was magnificent as ever. And I think if you can see the reaction from the audience, we're so delighted that you've joined us today to build this movement. And our next speaker, we know that young people are so important to what happens on the 23rd of June. We know the statistics on this are absolutely, clear as day, that between the ages of 18 and 41, the opinion polls say the younger you are, the more likely you are to vote in the EU referendum. So our task is to go out and convince as many young people as we can to build our broad mass movement over the weeks ahead. And to do that, we need fantastic advocates. So our next speaker is Caroline Hill. She's the chair of Young Labour, and I think she's going to tell us how we're going to do it, hopefully.
I'm going to try and tell us how to do it. You have heard all morning, all afternoon, all the arguments to stay in Europe, to fight for a social Europe, a just Europe. But I think we need to talk now about how exactly we are going to do that and what we can do moving out of this room tonight, because we simply cannot afford to lose. My generation cannot afford to lose this. So I'm 25 years old. I carry around with me tens of £1,000s worth of debt that I collected training to be a primary school teacher. I benefited from a year in Avignon as an Erasmus student, something that was uniquely valuable in my vision of this cooperative Europe, a Europe of solidarity and tolerance. So I now work in a community primary school in North London. 95% of those children qualify for free school meals, which means this is the highest rate in the country. It is one of the most poorest, deprived areas in our city. It's in Islington. It sits right next to the most expensive properties in the capital. It just shows this rampant inequality that we have in this city. Now, we're being told as teachers by the Tory government that we need to teach British values. Now, the way I see it, that's democracy, that's liberty, that's tolerance. And fundamentally, those are reasons that we need to stay in the European Union. So every single day I see these amazing, resilient 8-year-olds This is who I teach. These children are getting thrown out of council housing. They are sharing one-bedroom flats with the rest of their family. They come into school hungry every single day because there's no breakfast at home. We have a charity at my work that provides these kids with a bagel every day because a bagel is clearly the food of social change. The thing is, though, these children, they are subject to racism, to xenophobia every single day because they're Eastern European or they're Muslim or they're black. And they are told every single day by people on the television that they are the problem. They say that they are the ones threatening the country, threatening Britain's success. We have to completely reject this argument, this anti-immigration argument. This argument is threatening our communities that we live in, and it is just a completely thinly veiled attempt by the Tories to hide their absolute failure to support those in poverty. So last night I was down the pub with some of my colleagues, and this is where the conversations always get interesting because we started talking about the EU referendum. Like, I couldn't have planned it better. So the staff at my school, they're an educated bunch. They are accepting, they are liberal, they are educators, they are highly underpaid for what they do. They recognise that the arguments from the pro-Brexit campaigners are this fear-mongering xenophobia. But as far as they're concerned, the Remain campaign isn't really saying much to them either. It's because the debate is being framed entirely on fear. Fear of not having something, fear of others, net migration statistics of these intangible numbers speaking about the country's economy, one from another, one from the other side. Talking about jobs, competing with Europeans for jobs or having more jobs if we stay. It just doesn't make sense. There is no clear argument. It's no positive vision. No one to say that we can build a Europe that will provide adequate housing, that will provide adequate welfare and adequate employment with the rights that should come with it. To do that, we do need to be there. And to do this, we need to be spreading this message. No one else is doing it. We have only another month to get out there and spread a message of hope. So I love this city. It's acceptance, it's multiculturalism. London is probably likely to vote to Remain. But it is the other parts of the country that I'm worried about. There are huge pockets of our communities that have been convinced by the mainstream media that the EU is taking from them, that it's putting into the pockets of someone else on a continent that seems a million miles away from their lives. Communities that have been suffering through 6 long years of austerity politics where the government has been taking from their pockets and putting into the pockets of someone else who has far too much money anyway. We cannot allow this narrative to continue. So Young Labour, which is the organisation that I represent, are campaigning to Remain. There is absolutely no way that the left can walk away from the EU and abandon it to the fascist politics of the right. There is absolutely no way that young people as well can walk away from the EU. We simply cannot afford to be left isolated without the rights and protections that we need as young people with precarious employment situations at the moment. We need the protections that the EU gives us. Our futures are already being eroded by a government that literally couldn't give a monkeys. There is one big thing that we can do leaving this room, and we've got to do it now. You've got about a week to go and make sure that everyone that you know is registered to vote. So on June the 7th, you need to make sure that absolutely everyone you know, including young people, are registered. By messing around with the electoral register a couple of years ago, the Tories have inadvertently shot themselves in the foot. They did it to win an election, and now they're realising that in order to win this one, they need to get people registered again. Young people who are mobile because of ridiculous housing prices and like insecure work have been kicked off this register, and many of them don't even know it. And you've got a week and a half to tell this demographic, which are the most likely to vote to remain, to get themselves registered. So that is one tangible thing that you have got to do leaving this room today. We do need to get out there. We do need to make sure we've got a positive vision that is inspiring those who need it the most to vote for Britain's stake in Europe. We need to get people registered. We need to get them inspired with a positive vision of hope and let them know that the politics of fear can be replaced with a vision of something better. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, that was great. And so everyone, please go away. Friends, family, midnight on the 7th of June is the deadline, so let's get everyone registered. So our next speaker, I think one of the themes of the first two has been standing together alongside migrants and saying migrants are workers and we defend migrant rights. And so the labour movement is so important to promoting that message, so important to saying migrant rights are workers' rights. And our next speaker has been a fantastic advocate for those rights inside the trade union movement, challenging lies about migrants that we're told every day. Please give it up for the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, Wrack.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends and comrades, I want to just say a few words about how my union has debated this issue, which is a difficult and complex issue for many people, and how I've approached it personally as a socialist within the trade union movement. And a starting point for us was that this is not our referendum. This is not a referendum of our choosing, at our time, on our question. It arises out of wrangling in the Tory party, about a battle for power in the Tory party, and about a threat from the right within the Tory party grassroots. And as a result, regrettably, as has already been said, the agenda has largely been set by those people. And and I'll come on in more detail, it's inevitably reflected a debate around migration and about migrants. And one of the outcomes we might face is that we replace one Prime Minister with another. We replace one old Etonian with another old Etonian, because the immediate gainer, in my view, is likely to be Boris Johnson from an exit if that's what happens in the referendum. And I have to say, I struggle myself to understand the enthusiasm with which some of my comrades on the left have embraced this referendum. I see no positives from the prospect of a vote to leave. Secondly, we approach this question from an independent labour movement approach, because in reality this debate has largely been an argument between two groups of the elite in this country. Between businesses who want to exploit us in the EU and businesses who want to exploit us better outside the EU. And for us, the labour movement can't ally with either of those factions of what I would call the ruling class. They both represent the interests of banks and billionaires, not of ordinary people. So my union, we've argued within the TUC, we should not line up with any of the official campaigns as a result of that. And we welcome initiatives like Another Europe is Possible as a result. Thirdly, I want to take up one of the points that is raised by some on the left in relation to this debate. And I'll say it before they do. The European Union is a boss's club. There's no gloss from me on that issue. We don't defend the status quo in the EU. It is a boss's club. It does support neoliberal policies. Many in this room and many in the trade union movement have been appalled by the treatment of the Greek people in relation to the fight against austerity. So we don't gloss over that, we don't prettify the EU. The EU acts to promote the interests of capital, but, brothers and sisters, so does UK PLC, so does the British state. And if you look historically at the history of the past 35 years, you will find, in fact, that the British governments of various descriptions have pioneered neoliberal policies internationally, in Britain and in the EU. So for me, yes, we have enemies in the EU and its institutions, but on many of these issues, our main enemy is actually here in the City of London, here in Westminster, here running the government in the UK. And the trade union movement, and I think that the trade union movement does need to seriously assess its position in relation to some of these issues. But the truth is the EU has made concessions on workers' rights, despite its origins, despite its lack of democracy. And these would be under a clear and immediate threat in the event of a British vote to leave. And those calling for such a vote within the Labour movement have nothing to say in reality about what happens on day 2, what happens in year 1 and year 2 of an exit, what will the government do, what will happen to EU-based law, what will happen to those workers' rights which have been won as a result of those concessions that I mentioned. These are dismissed by some as secondary. They are not secondary to millions of ordinary working people in this country. Millions of jobs depend upon the state of our economy and upon trade. And it's not surprising, therefore, that those unions representing workers in manufacturing have asked searching questions about this and are concerned and are broadly supporting the campaign to remain. And just thinking about those calling for exit, one comment that struck me, Professor Patrick Minford, many of you may remember him from the days of Margaret Thatcher. He's an economist at Cardiff University. He supports Brexit. He wasn't trying to keep this a secret, by the way, because he wrote it in The Sun. So he's aiming it at a mass audience. And he says, over time, if we left the EU, it seems likely that we would mostly eliminate manufacturing, leaving mainly industries such as design, marketing and high tech. But this shouldn't scare us. Well, I tell you what, it will scare millions of working people in this country who rely for their livings on such jobs. Leaving will benefit the far right, the racists and the xenophobes in Britain and indeed across the continent. And it's already happening. Make no mistake, Brexit will mean that the key political debate in the UK for 2 years or more will be about numbers of immigrants who are allowed into the country, the rights of those people who are here and whether they stay or not. That will be the focus of the debate if there is a vote to leave. And I've started from this point, I've said it before. Let's be clear, workers are suffering as a result of a long-running economic depression. It was sparked in the banks in the pursuit of profit, not by migrants. Housing shortages. Housing shortages that are affecting, that meaning millions of young people have no real prospect of a decent place to live and getting on the so-called housing ladder. That's a result of the failure of the housing market, not of migrants. Stretched public services, like my own public service, the fire service, is suffering record hits on a level never seen in history. It's a result of austerity policies pursued by George Osborne and David Cameron, not a result of migrants. And for those in the trade union movement who are concerned about negotiating decent living standards for people, low pay is caused by rip-off bosses and not by migrant workers. So, we have to say, from our point of view, that a vote to remain is not taken as an endorsement of the status quo whatsoever, but a recognition that at the present time we have not been in a position to put in place something better. A vote to remain for us means a cold, realistic assessment of the balance of forces we face today and the prospects of the different outcomes in the referendum. But but it must be the start of a campaign to build a new alternative. And there are two aspects for that for me that I'll finish on. Firstly, we want to see democratic change in Britain and across Europe. Let's end the secrecy that does surround many of the EU institutions. Let's see what the European Central Bank discusses. Publish the minutes, hold their sessions in public, for God's sake. Let's see what these people are plotting against us. If it's realistic for citizens in every single European country to see what happens in their parliament and in the European Parliament, let's see what goes on behind closed doors when ministers get together or when the Commission gets together. Let's put on the agenda a campaign for fundamental democratic change across the board. And secondly, we need to develop a European-wide campaign for a real alternative to austerity, to xenophobia and to climate disaster. Let's take the recent debate on steel. We should be demanding that we establish an alternative plan, a people's plan, a workers' plan for steel and other industries on a European-wide basis that actually talks about what could be delivered and about how we do protect jobs here and across Europe. We should develop an alternative workers' plan to tackle unemployment in Britain and across Europe. On the question of public ownership, my own union has published articles and moved at the TUC that we should actually put on the agenda the public ownership of the banks and the financial institutions. I have to say, in the modern world, we have to raise that on a European-wide basis as well if we're really going to tackle the threats that we face. We've faced years of austerity, threatening to undermine all the gains that the Labour movement has campaigned for generations. Yes, the EU has played its part in that austerity attack on our people. A further economic downturn is likely to mean a renewed onslaught against our people here and across the continent. That's their future. Our future is different. Our future has to be a Europe of democracy and of solidarity. Can that be done within the current EU? That's a debate we need to have, brothers and sisters. But our strategy in response to that international crisis is based upon that internationalism, for a fight for democracy, for a campaign based upon solidarity, for another Europe, for a workers' Europe, for a fundamental change here in the UK and across Europe. That's the approach we take. Thank you very much.
Wow. That was every bit as good as I expected, Matt. Fantastic. Our final speaker is Zoe Gardner. She's a spokesperson for the Another Europe campaign. She's also, when she's doing other things, a fantastic campaigner for migrant and refugee rights. Please give it up for Zoe.
Hi everybody, thank you for lasting this long. I'm really impressed. Promise not to keep you too long. Falls to me to follow a really powerful speech and a day full of really inspirational speakers. And I want to thank everybody who's taken part today on behalf of Another Europe, everybody who's come along and shown us that energy and that inspirational vision that's been lacking so much from this EU referendum debate and given us something that I think we're all going to take forward. Back in September, I never would have thought that I'd be on stage after the likes of the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, or that I'd be sharing a platform with Yanis Varoufakis or speaking at events with big names like that. I don't think anyone in Another Europe thought that was going to happen. Back in September, there were, 10 of us that Luke called up and got together in a room and said, right, let's try and do something. Seriously though, we have done something. And when you see a huge event like this, and you see how many people we've got together, and you see the big names, and you see the fancy gobos with logos and lights, and we all got very excited about those, I think it's easy to believe that there's some huge team or a big budget behind this, but there isn't. None of this has come about by magic, and none of you are here today because we had the funds to really plug that hard. It's all come about by the mundane, boring, everyday actions of a group of people who decided to pick up the phone and call again and again, send the email, make the Facebook group. Things that you guys are all familiar with doing, mundane actions that build something big if you actually take the time to do them. So back in September, we were just a small, disparate group of people. Today, we're a much bigger group of people. Today, we can do much more. And I think the reason why we've managed to have such success is because this campaign was so desperately needed. We need a critical Remain campaign, because today in Europe, inequality still causes suffering. Austerity continues to punish the many for the excesses and the greed of the few. Today in Europe, corporations are still working to get their voice over ours and to take away from our democratic freedoms through TTIP. Today, in the UK, right-wing politicians are rubbing their hands with glee at the prospect of a bonfire of workers' rights on June the 24th. Today in the UK, your friends, maybe even your families, my friends, some of my family, are worried about their futures here in this country, about whether they'll still have rights when they become not citizens with rights like the rest of us, different because they're EU migrants. Today, across Europe, British citizens, EU citizens still, are worried about what their futures will look like in the countries that they've come to call home. And today across Europe, refugees, human beings who have fled from war and persecution, are locked up, beaten back, fenced out, tear-gassed, and deported, denying their human rights. And I think most of all today in Europe, what we're most concerned about is that across the whole of Europe, the far right, the xenophobes and the nationalists are taking advantage of all of the above to exploit everything that has been put upon the workers of this continent and to gain ground in a way that is truly scary. And neo-fascism across Europe is a real threat today. And this referendum is a part of that debate, whether we want it to be or not. But today, all across Europe, people are standing up. We're only a part of it. In France, hundreds of thousands have been on strike and demonstrating on the streets as part of the Nuit Debout movement for workers' rights to protect their basic freedoms. In Spain, Podemos has joined with Izquierda Unida and the Indignados and are making real progress with a really exciting brand of progressive politics that they're pushing forward. In Greece, ordinary people are giving EU leaders a lesson in solidarity when they respond with basic humanity to the refugees that they see on their doorstep and on their streets. Today, hundreds and thousands of us Europeans are standing up against TTIP, and we can work together to bring it down. And today, we're all here in this room to say another Europe is possible. And neither of the official campaigns want us to talk about these things. For the Brexiteers and for the mainstream Remain lot, there's little to tell the difference. I think Owen Jones said far more eloquently than me at the beginning of the day, pointed out the big differences between them. But I did find one, and it's in their point of view towards Turkey. For Remain, Turkey's just a convenient dumping ground for unwanted humans, also known as refugees. But for Brexiteers, it's also the big bogeyman to scare people with the Islamophobic and xenophobic hate. If we leave this debate up to them, and if we leave the case to remain in the EU down to Britain stronger in Europe, we not only may lose this referendum, but we may lose making the chance to make Europe something worth fighting to be part of at all. I'm not sure that the people who run Britain Stronger in Europe would know a genuinely representative, grassroots, progressive campaign to remain in the European Union if it slapped them in the face. But I suggest we give them that slap to find out. And that's down to us, that's down to everyone in this room today. And this is where I do my big call to action and ask us all to take this out of this room and to carry on. Everyone in this room can do something really important for this campaign. Everyone can go out and start to have those conversations with their friends and their families, and to make sure, as Caroline has said, that young people and everyone around them is registered to vote. Everyone in this room can get a few more progressives registered to vote, and I expect you to do it. And some of you can do more. Some of you can join up with your local groups. We've got a huge amount of resources, and we can put you in touch with networks. We've got networks of people campaigning on this all over the country. If there isn't one near to you, you can set one up. You can set up a stall. You can set up a public meeting. All of these banal actions that we took to make this day happen, you can go away and take one or two of them, and it's not that hard, but together, those banal actions done by many people create a movement. So please, everybody, fill in your volunteer cards. You'll find them in your packs. They say what you're going to do, pledge to do something, get involved. Don't just come along here and listen and then leave. And in fact, when you leave with us, because we're going to start straight away. We're heading off to Euston to do a mass leafleting right now, to take this argument, to take this positive vision, this idea that's been completely missing from the referendum debate to this point, this idea of a Europe that we actually want to fight for, something worth having that we can create, a positive vision. We can take that out to the streets right now, so I urge you to join us, to keep in touch with another Europe as possible, and to keep fighting, because if we don't, then we will lose that chance. And we have to take it, and we have to believe that another world is possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. I think you exaggerated slightly when you said it was 10 people. I'm sure it was 3. Don't go anywhere just yet. We're nearly done, and we're going to go and do a mass leafleting. But what we're going to do just for this final few minutes, if I could invite all our speakers to the stage, if you're still here, if you can come and join us, and all of our volunteers. For all of our volunteers from the day who have been helping out with stewarding, with running to get bagels. Particularly to the one individual, I won't embarrass them by saying, who got £500 out of the cash from the bank with their own money to pay for the bagels, and we're going to pay back later. Just thanks to all of you. So if you could all come forward to the front. Quickly as possible without making a fire hazard. And before you go away tonight, we are going to go, and we're going to go up to Euston, as many of us as possible. We're not going to spend too long, people are very tired, but we're going to give out leaflets and talk to people. And I'd really encourage you to join us doing that. But you can also take massive amounts of material, as much as you can carry home with you from the stall outside. It's all free, with one exception. So take posters to put up in your window. Take leaflets to give out to your workmates and friends and colleagues, and to organise actions. And if you want to support the campaign financially, get a mug for £5 so that you always have something to remember this campaign with in the kitchen. So buy a mug for £5 on your way out, and also maybe buy a t-shirt for £10 if you're feeling... Let's stretch. Come in. stand here. Yeah. Okay, and very finally, if you want to join, I think we're going to ask John to start us off by signing the London Statement and Declaration. And that's an opportunity for me to remind everyone that today's event isn't just organised by Another Europe is Possible. We've been working really closely with the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025, which I'll really urge you to go away and join and support that hugely important campaign. Like Wrack mentioned, the campaign to fight for transparency is one of their initial mass campaigns that they're waging all across Europe. And also, I have to mention and give thanks to Open Democracy for their generous, who have been live streaming the event today, making sure that people can participate and watch this with us wherever they are globally, and also gave a generous financial contribution to the event as well. So thank you very much to them.
And one final thing, I think, can we give a big round of applause to all of our volunteers, who I hope you will become one of them. But before that, he's disappeared. But can we have a huge round of applause for Luke Cooper, for all of his hard work, for galvanising us and making this happen. How are you?
Very good. Okay, so when you go outside, grab some leaflets, join us in coming up to Euston. Our lead leafleter, I can tell you, is going to be Caroline Lucas. So please join us in taking our message to Euston Station. Thank you very much, everyone.